Okay, so just for everyone, the question was with respect to the redwood trees that are in Menlo Park, how are they managed right now with respect to the drought, and would there be potential long-term impacts?
Hey, that's a great question. So in Menlo Park, we have, I think, about 250,000 trees. And we have street trees and trees that are privately owned. And we do have a heritage tree ordinance in place. So to even remove or impact a tree, the city does have to be contacted. It is a formal process. And I know we have done some outreach, for example, our city arborist to get, in light of the drought, to get some news out there. We did put together an informational piece on the city website for residents of, the droughts here. If you have concerns of how to take care of your redwood tree, he has a great list of tips on the website right now that talk about that. During the drought, a lot of the trees in Menlo Park are very mature and very established. They have really deep roots, and so many of the trees, residents don't really have to water them. The trees almost, in a sense, take care of themselves. But for example, if somebody comes to the city and applies for a heritage tree removal permit, the city arborist goes out there, takes a look at the tree, and if it's healthy, then he can grant removal of it. Or if somebody's going to have a construction project of some sort, there's also a process for that to make sure that the tree's not impacted in any way. So there's a tree protection plan that has to be in place. So being a Tree City USA, we really love our trees. There's a process before anything even impacts a tree. But I think some of our residents have found the city arborist's tips on the webpage very helpful. And we do get questions from time to time coming into the environmental programs line saying, I have a tree, how is the drought going to be impacted? And we can connect them with their city arborist to go out there and take a look at the tree if they're very concerned. So a couple of steps that we can take, but we do love our trees.
So there's a question here about farm ponds. Well, two questions. One is, do the farm ponds always use liners? It kind of depends on what the pond is constructed for or how it's being managed. Most of the ponds on the coast were built 60 to 80 years ago with a lifespan of about 20 years. And with they created the habitat for the endangered species that are now present, which are the restriction in our ability to maintain the ponds because endangered species are present. So the new ponds that we're doing typically do have liners, whether they're clay or plastic. The older ponds may or may not have, but often the older ponds are leaking, and that's the problem. It depends on what the substrate is. The ponds that, if it's pure agriculture, pure water conservation, making sure that you don't lose any water, we typically would want a plastic liner on it because the clay ones will crack when the pond dries, and then they don't function as well. But if we're interested in having emergent vegetation and habitat and other considerations, we may have a clay liner. That was your first question, right? Your second question, I think the question is well researched, South County. I think what you're asking is there information or has there been any study about groundwater resources? Is that right? All right. So no, there isn't enough known. There have been, the county completed a mid-coast groundwater study years ago, the Kleinfelder report, which actually we did for the county. It was through our office. South County, there are a number of folks at the county and nonprofits and otherwise, and USGS and others who are looking at trying to understand what the groundwater resources are in the South Coast and their relationship to the surface water resources. But we have a lot of informal data because we know the handful of companies that drill wells and the plumbers who service those wells, and so we just call them and ask for information so we have a sense of what's going on where, but there hasn't been a comprehensive study. There's a lot of interest in doing that.
All right, well, we have another question. How, when conducting water education, do you make the information simple and accessible? Staying away from water wonky vocabulary and jargon. And it says even the term gray water mystifies most people. So we can open it up to the panel to talk about.
I can start. I think the messaging, and it's been working very successfully in Menlo Park. In Menlo Park, it's in the indicators report that our mandate was 16%, we're at 35%. And it is because of the messaging that we have. And I think the most important part is to keep it as simple as possible. Including steps in there of the measures that they can take, where the information is coming from. And also, it's not just information piece after information piece. We want to make it very clear exactly why we're giving them this information. So as long as the residents have all the facts, we find it very effective, and also making sure that they're not only getting the information, but there's a resource for them to go to get their questions answered. So having that open dialogue and having the resources available for the residents is important.
I think I might have the opposite problem. Our Genentech employees really like things that sound complicated and scientific, and so we have to make sure that we appear to be talking at their level. So yeah, I mean, it's gray water and black water, and all the data on the value of being vegetarian, and the pros and cons, and we like getting into all the really thorny stuff and philosophical discussions. So we're really not trying to keep it simple, except for the art contest with the kids. That was really fun, and the one that we chose as the winner was, if I can do it, you can do it. We really like that sentiment. Like, if a kid can do it, come on, you guys, you can all save water. So we try to go both simple and complex.
For our audiences, we have to use very different messages. So just even in the agricultural community, the differences between nurseries, between conventional and organic growers, they're very different cultures. Although the thing that we find has worked the most is when there's financial incentives tied. It doesn't matter so much what the message is. And then also, interestingly, the municipalities themselves, and when we're working with the jurisdictions, that's actually sometimes for us the biggest challenge, even though I think the intent of that question was probably from a municipality or jurisdiction about how to reach a broader audience, but we actually sometimes have challenges in the other direction. So I'd be interested in feedback from any of you about that.
Okay, why don't you hold on to the microphone right now, because we have another question for you, Kellyx, and it goes back to the ponds with respect to the permits. Is there a movement for streamlining the process for the pond permits, especially considering how beneficial they are?
There have been many movements. There have been a number of efforts. There's a nonprofit organization called Sustainable Conservation outside, that's based in San Francisco, that has worked with a lot of resource conservation districts on streamlining permitting. Largely the permitting streamlining doesn't reduce the burden of permitting, but it shifts the burden from individual landowners to resource conservation districts who have the intestinal fortitude to take on all the permitting. But what happens that I've often seen with these kinds of like master permits or programmatic permits is that the regulatory agencies are so concerned about something making its way through a loophole, it actually becomes as or more restrictive than it would have been for individual projects. But there's the significant shift in who's the applicant, and you can sometimes batch and bundle them, which can reduce costs, and it can make it happen faster. Assemblymember Rich Gordon sponsored AB 2193 that streamlined small habitat restoration projects, voluntary habitat restoration projects, but ponds were exempted from that. They were excluded from the legislation because of some concerns that some folks had, because ponds can be more complicated with water rights and some other things. And the Coastal Commission issued a consistency determination with the National Marine Fisheries Service so that if it's a fisheries restoration project, it can be exempt from having to get a separate coastal development permit. So that can be helpful. But those are, it takes off a couple of pieces of that puzzle.
Great. Thanks. So this next question is very equitable here because there's basically one for each of you. We'll start with Vanessa. How do you manage rate tiers for lower income residents?
Actually, that's a very good question. In Public Works, we are in the process of new water rates right now. I believe they are in effect, but whoever answered that question, I can connect you with the expert in that in our Public Works division, and that was her main project. So can't add too much to that, but I'd be happy to get back to you.
Great. You can pass it down to Kellyx. The question for you is whether or not you can help with perch water recapture for our campus?
Yes.
Okay. Well, all right, that was the easy one.
It's essentially like tailwater. It's like the person who asked the question. Can you raise your?
Yeah. So sorry, these are my 3 questions. I work at San Mateo Community College District. We have a campus on our northern end of the peninsula where we have pretty consistent underground water resource dealing with the management process. You saw some of the permits. You're very familiar with them. So we're just kind of like scratching our heads about like, is that worth it in terms of the dollar value and the PR value and all that in terms of trying to recapture that water and what other resources we can have. So knowing that we have somebody in our backyard to potentially help with that is really super.
Yeah, this is certainly with cemeteries and farms and others where that would be doing water conservation or water recycling or capturing runoff or tailwater and reusing it. It has to fit with their business model typically, and so part of what we do is find that what is the price point where their investment is worthwhile, and what other programs there are, be they PG&E or Farm Bill or other programs, can shift the scale so that the cost benefit to them is more favorable to do the water conservation.
All right, so Katie, for you, the question was whether or not the water savings that Genentech is seeing, whether or not that savings is a significant driver for the company.
Economically.
Yeah, economically, as we look to the future with higher water prices, they'll definitely pay off. So we tend to look at projects with a pretty long horizon. So we say, well, in 20 years, what will this look like financially? And we don't have very good crystal balls right now to tell us what the price of water is going to be, but it looks like it's going to be a lot higher. And so as we know water will get more expensive, projects that we do now will have a big payoff in the future. But already, I mean, turning off the water to the lawns, that's cheap.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we haven't done a lot of really expensive things. Most of the recycled water projects, I think it's like a 3-year, 4-year payback, something like that. So that's pretty good, pretty close to what our energy projects are. And it's been a problem in the past with water projects before the drought, water projects having to compete for the same budget dollars as energy projects. And it was so much easier for energy to pay back. But it's really starting to change now, especially when you add in the added incentive of doing it in order to reduce business risk for running out of water to run our business.
Great. Why don't you keep the mic here? I got another question for you. And that's whether or not Genentech is helping other companies in the area create water conservation programs?
Well, I've given some presentations at various places, and I collaborate with, like part of the Best Buildings Challenge that I talked about was collaboration with a lot of Bay Area companies where we shared best practices. We did do a water summit, our second annual water summit, with a lot of other Genentech and Roche sites in California that were dealing with the drought. We like sharing best practices with anybody who'll listen to us, talk to us. So we're trying as much as we can to compare notes.
Great. Vanessa, there was a question for you about swimming pools. The question is, what's the state of the swimming pool, and are people filling them in? And do people now consider them a real estate liability?
That last part I would be able to provide an answer to, but under our water restrictions, you can build a pool, you just can't fill it. So that's a question that we get quite a bit. So, if they have the resource, if they being the resident have the resource to be able to trek in the water, they can do so, but that's the current state of pools right now.
We did have a comment. It wasn't a question, but it was a comment from one person, and that was that compost applications can help reduce water and also improve soil once the rain returns, and that Recology has free compost available for pickup.
That comment came from Gino. He just walked out the door, but Recology right over on Shoreway at the Shoreway Environmental Center can get free compost. So I wanted to share that with everybody so everybody.
So I actually have a question for Katie. or I don't know if you can answer this also. One of the things that I've wondered is when there are these programs to get people to conserve water and then there's signage installed, the full life cycle analysis of the water consumption to produce signage versus water conservation. Do either of you know where the tipping point is on that, when it's beneficial in terms of overall water consumption?
We've done some life cycle analysis on a variety of things, not on signage though. We consider signage pretty low impact, but we've done things like for reusable cups versus disposable cups. We've done life cycle analyses that kind of changes now that water's more scarce. Is it better to wash your dishes or use the compostable cups? So we've done some of that, but we haven't looked at signage. I think that communication is super important, and it's worth printing a few signs. The signs that we put in our lawns are 100% recyclable aluminum. They told us we could just throw them in our recycling bin when we're done.
We haven't done any full life cycle analysis on signage either, although we do find it a very critical part of getting the message out there. And to add on to what Katie talked about, the city does have an internal environmental preferable purchasing policy, which also promotes, using compostables, or if somebody in the city wants to buy a new appliance, they would consult with the policy to make sure that it's energy efficient, no water use, and things like that. So that's a very good thing to look forward to in the future, though, consider.
Okay. Another question for Katie. So is Genentech, are they exploring any bioremediation, floating islands, or swale type of projects?
I don't know what floating islands are. Do you know what floating islands are? Yeah, we do swales. We've done swales for years, and retention ponds and things like that. But can somebody tell me what floating islands are?
Have you explored things like living machines? And if you're on the coast, you can do things with islands that will help break down. I mean, if you have a lot of water around you, you can use the water, that to break down.
I love the idea of living machines. We're baby steps. The gray water system is about as far out on a limb as I feel I'm going to be able to go with getting past the management and the ick factor and things like that. So gray water this year, maybe black water systems and living machines in a few years.
What's a swale?
So it's an engineered thing with multiple layers where the water passes through and gets filtered and goes back into the groundwater or into goes back to the bay. Yeah, it's like a fake, it looks like a fake river, but it's carefully engineered with a variety of different materials that will filter the water naturally, so that the water isn't just running off.
Swales are part of an overall strategy to slow, spread, and sink water, so that to make water run less efficiently across a landscape, so that natural and engineered filtration can happen.
Well, if we don't have any other questions, I'd like to turn this back over to Adrian. Thank you. Oh, we do have one.
Go ahead and just shout it out.
Katie, these questions are for you. For the paycheck incentives, are you measuring individual consumption and then like benefiting individuals, or is it cumulative like per facility? And then are you like giving that, or does everyone benefit in that facility?
I understand the question.
And then
So
how
I'll-
do you measure that?
Okay, so I'll repeat the question. The question is, the paycheck incentives, is that based on individual behavior or facility by facility performance? So it's not. It's overall, it's not even just our facility, and it's not even just Genentech. It's all of Roche, our parent company. If they hit their annual goal for this footprint metric, then all of us get a bigger bonus. And it's combined with the bonuses we get for all kinds of business things, for the drugs that we make and things like that. So we have a very complex set of multipliers for our bonuses, and one of them is a sustainability metric. But it means that we have to contribute to the overall success of Roche. But we're 20%, there are 200 Roche sites, but we're 20% of all of Roche, just Genentech South San Francisco, size-wise and impact-wise. So what we do has a big impact. So we explain to people that it is important what we're doing here, because it's a big chunk of that metric that impacts whether you get your bonus or not.
And I have another question for you. Do you have time?
Yeah, last one though.
I work in a big company too right now, and there is a cafeteria, and I'm noticing that so many people get their food to go and throw it away on site in the cafeteria, even though it's compostable and recyclable. That still has to be composted and recycled, and it was still made in the first place. And so I was wondering if you notice a lot of that, if you encourage, if the people in the cafeteria encourage, to use dine-in-ware, or what you found out when you looked at whether it was more important, or not, whether it was better to wash your items or to just use a compostable.
So the question is the trade-off between why so many people eat out of compostable dishes, and this happens all the time. I walk around and I say, why are you eating out of that compostable dish instead of getting the food to go for here? And people have all kinds of excuses, like they want to shake their salad, so they want a lid, or one person said I was afraid someone's going to sneeze on my food, we've heard it all. But we had an intern last summer do this life cycle analysis on this, and it actually turned out that when we used an old, inefficient dishwasher in one of our cafeterias, it was almost a break even based on the overall life cycle analysis. But in the newer cafeterias, the better dishwashers, it was much better to use reusable dishes. So we've got the backside of signs in each of the cafeterias where the guys are handing the food out, saying, remember to ask them for here or to go. And they just have to remember to ask and make sure they put things on plates when it's for here. We have campaigns often where we do say no to go is our little theme thing. And if you go through the checkout line and pay for your food and you are using a real plate, you get a raffle ticket. And then we hold these raffles. So during Earth Week and during America Recycles Month, we'll have raffles if you say no to go. So we try as much as we can. Catering outside the cafeteria is even a bigger problem with food waste. We're really trying to attack food waste and the problem with reusables that are, disposables that are used as part of catering. So it's a big focus area for us. Thanks.
Excellent question. So with that, let's go ahead and thank all of our panelists for